Hello and welcome to another episode of the YXE Sports Podcast for the week of November the 8th. Of course, we are live at Wendell Clark's Classic Grill and Bars. We are every single Monday, so thanks to everybody that's tuning in on the Wendell Clark's Facebook page. Thanks to everybody that's tuning in on the YXE Sports Podcast Facebook page. We're on YouTube, and we are on Twitter now as well. So big thanks. And a big thanks to everybody that is listening to the audio version of the YXE Sports Podcast as well. I am Matt Morrison. Thanks for tagging along, and I do have a special guest with me today as well, sitting to my left. Happy to be joined by Global Sports' Ryan Flaherty. And I know that you're on a time crunch, Ryan, so I appreciate you taking some time for us today. Sports are back. How are things?
Well, first of all, thanks for having me, Matt. I appreciate the invite. I know trying to make this happen for a couple of weeks, so glad I could slide over here and take some time with you. But yeah, it's fun again. Like my job is covering sports, and for a long time I didn't have any sports to cover, so it was a bit of an identity crisis, I think, for a while there. So it's great to see everything kind of back in full bloom now again, and this is always a fun time of year, pandemic or no pandemic, but to see, different teams going into playoffs, other teams are just getting going, rush season's just around the corner. It's a really fun time here in Saskatoon.
Yeah. In fact, rush training camp started this past weekend. We will talk about that, but tell everybody a little bit about yourself, where you're from, kind of how long have you been with Global Saskatoon, and what made you get into this crazy business?
Yeah, crazy is right. Yeah, I kind of have to be to do it.
Yeah,
right?
I guess
you're
so,
not here to get rich, that's for sure. But no, I'm born and raised right here in Saskatoon, and I did a few different things after high school. University wasn't really the thing for me, so I worked for a while. I was in the Navy Reserves for a long time. I was a full-time member. I worked for the Canadian Armed Forces for a number of years. Then I eventually decided to go back to school, took broadcasting, started out in Medicine Hat doing news, switched over to sports, and came home to Saskatoon. I was fortunate enough to get an offer from Global kind of out of the blue about 6.5 years ago. So I just got an email one day, said, "Hey, you ever thought of coming home to work?" And I said, I always told people if someone offered me a job, I'd probably think about it. So that's what happened. Yeah, so I've been there ever since. It's a lot of fun.
So you've been here and you've been doing a fantastic job. Like you said, it's the rush season is getting underway. Face-off weekend is right around a month away. They open up the season in Halifax. Training camp started this past weekend. You're somebody that obviously, as your job description at Global entails, is you follow the rush quite closely. Training camp started this weekend. Obviously, there was no season last year, so there's been a lot of changes since their season came to an end in 2020 compared to now on the floor, but also behind the bench as well. What are some of the changes that the Rush are faced with here, obviously behind the bench and on the floor?
Yeah, we talk. I feel like a broken record these last few weeks because every time I'm reading a script on the air about another team that's starting back up, it's been so long since, but the Rush, they faced a longer layoff than almost anyone because just like everyone else, they got shut down in March of last year, but they had an entire season wiped out as well. And now they've had to wait all the way until December, when the season finally gets going. By the time they play their first game, it will have been almost 21 months. So change was bound to happen. 2 full off seasons, essentially had 2 drafts. We had an expansion draft, and that also impacted their roster. So you mentioned behind the bench, new head coach, Jeff McComb, not new to the Rush, not new to Rush fans. He's been an assistant for a number of years as their offensive coordinator, but now he's taking on the reins as the main bench boss. And Derek Keenan, who of course has been the head coach for many years, stepping back to just remain as the general manager, which he's worn both hats for a long time. So now he's just focused on the GM job. Jeff McComb's taken over behind the bench. They've brought Jimmy Quinlan back into the fold on the coaching staff. Jeremy Televes is back as well. And then on the floor, in terms of players, the core group mainly still intact, but no more Jeremy Thompson, no more Ben McIntosh, no more Matt Hossack, and some new faces, Josh Courier, who was acquired in that Ben McIntosh trade. Dan Lintner, they picked him up, and a big free agent signing in Matt Beers, who I think fans are going to come to fall in love with very quickly.
Especially in Saskatchewan.
Yeah, absolutely. The name says it all, but also just the style of play. He's a very gritty defender with a bit of a mean streak, something that the Rush maybe haven't had before. So I think he's going to be a popular addition too. So lots to get excited about. And then, of course, there's all their draft picks and prospects that are joining the fold as well. 31 players in camp this year. That's the most they've ever had, but it allowed them to do some different things. They can play more with more tempo in camp because guys are getting some rest on the rotation. So it'll be fun to see how this team comes together, over the next couple of weeks.
Well, and I remember back to that 2020 season, the entire league ended up getting shut down, but the Rush had actually lost before the cancellation, right? They lost in that playoff series to the Mammoth, which I don't think they were expecting to, right? So everybody's season kind of abruptly ended, but I think for the Rush more so than other teams, obviously, because their season did get shut, or they lost before the shutdown. The other thing that we should mention is Evan Kirk is no longer a part of the Rush either, right? So it sounds like Adam Shute is going to be taking over the reins as the number one goalie in Rush Nation. That in itself is a bit of a storyline, I would imagine, as well.
Yeah, absolutely, and good catch by you. Yeah, I forgot to mention the change in goal. It's a massive one. Adam Shute, this is going to be his first real opportunity as the number one guy, the guy. He did start a few games back in 2018 when Evan Kirk was sidelined with an injury. Shute started 5 games in a row. He went 4-1 in those starts, and he's had a spot start or two in his time with the Rush, but he comes into camp as the guy. They have Cameron Dunkerley, who is a guy they drafted a few years back, who Derek Keenan is high on, but he hasn't seen any action in the NLL at all. So he's competing for the backup job. Realistically, it's Schute's job to lose. And, the Rush, they have utmost confidence in him. He's shown in his limited action that he can handle that role. It's going to be interesting to see now full-time how he handles that.
Wendell Clark's Classic Grill and Bar says we're going to need a nickname for Adam Shute now, right? That's the thing with the Rush and the goalies, whether it's Aaron Bold or Evan Kirk. We'll have to work on a nickname for Adam Shute. Yeah. Where do you see the kind of the state of the NLL as a league, right? My opinion, I think they're only getting stronger with expansion and some other things that have been going on. And, obviously you look to some other leagues who had a little bit of a tougher time throughout COVID, not playing last year and stuff like that. But I feel like the NLL kind of capitalized on maybe not playing because it allowed them to look at some things and how they do business. And I don't know if you agree with this or not, but I think they kind of ended up coming out stronger on the other end.
Absolutely. I think this is possibly the healthiest and the strongest that the league has been in a long time, if not ever. Maybe not ever, but certainly one of the strongest they've been, which is strange to say coming out of a pandemic. But you're right. They've been very busy despite not playing any games for the last year and a half plus. You mentioned expansion. Well, there's a new team this season in the Panther City Lacrosse Club down in Fort Worth, Texas. They're starting play this season. And then, of course, Las Vegas is entering the fold next season with the star power behind that team with Wayne Gretzky, Steve Nash, Dustin Johnson, part of the ownership group. They just signed 2 big new TV deals. I can't name the network that they're with, but very exciting for them, both nationally broadcast, both in Canada and in the States. And every single game will be able to be viewed online through those those outlets, through their streaming platforms, plus a weekly game of the week broadcast nationally in Canada. I know 4 of the Rush home games are going to be on national television this season. So awesome stuff for them. And Derek Keenan was joking this weekend that, it's great for the league. It's tough on GMs because of the expansion, you lose guys and things like that. But it's great for the players too, because actually the players just opted out of their collective bargaining agreement. And before anyone panics about that, it doesn't mean there's going to be any labor disruption this season, but that gives them a head start negotiating a new deal. They would have had one more year after this one, but with all the expansion and now new TV revenues coming in, the players are looking for a piece of that pie as well. So it looks like, all systems go right now for the NLL, and it's really exciting to see them back.
Lee is watching on Facebook, and he wants to know what happened to Evan Kirk. It was a free agent signing, I believe, with New England.
Yes.
Is that correct? Yeah.
He signed, actually, it's Rochester.
Rochester,
right. Evan Kirk, he's in the midst of becoming a police officer. Right. A lot of these lacrosse players, these NLL players, you talk about a piece of the pie. They're hopefully down the road this won't be necessary, but the vast majority of them have to work during the week in order to really make a full living. And Evan Kirk's in the process of becoming an Ontario provincial police officer. The travel was just going to be too difficult for him to make his way out here for all the home games. So they facilitated a move for him to sign with Rochester closer to home. He can still play. He can make that commute. And, because the Rush had Shute on the roster, they felt like they didn't really have to, keep Kirk in the fold.
Yeah.
They could allow him to sign that deal and move on.
Of course, we are live at Wendell Clark's Classic Grill and Bars. We are every single Monday. And of course, we're talking about lacrosse, but we're going to talk about some football too. And it's the NFL season. Thursdays, Sundays, Mondays, come on down to Wendell Clark's Classic Grill and Bar in Saskatoon. Super Bowl squares as well. You can fill out your Super Bowl squares and a chance to win some dollars, and also doing your part to fundraise some money for charities as well. So make sure you come on down to Wendell Clark's Classic Grill and Bar on the corner of Circle and Idlewild in Saskatoon. Another team that is a tenant of the Sasktel Center is the Saskatoon Blades, obviously. Cooled down a little bit this weekend, but they got off to a pretty hot start. They got swept this weekend by their arch rival, the Prince Albert Raiders. So those losses always sting a little bit more. But what have you seen so far this year from this team?
You know, it's a fun bunch. They got a really good group of players who all seem to have the buy-in with the new head coach, Brendan Sawney, who, you know, following suit from his predecessor, Mitch Love, another former Everett Silvertips assistant coach. So he kind of has that same defensive pedigree. But this team, they want to push the pace even more than maybe the last couple of years. They really want to take it to their opponents. They have the speed to do it. They're not the biggest team, but they are very fast. They got a lot of great skaters on the team. And although there's a couple players that maybe dominate the headlines when it comes to their offense, they have a serious depth of skill on that team. Their blue line is very strong. And when you have an overager like Nolan Meyer in goal, you're well solidified on that end. Of course, he's chasing the all-time wins record in the WHL. Took a bit of hit a bit of a snag on the weekend against PA. And then you mentioned it stings. You lose to your arch rivals. They got outscored 10-3 in those two games. And that's their first back-to-back losses this season. So now at 9-4-1, they're still in pretty good spot, second in their division. And big game against the Edmonton Oil Kings who are coming to town this week. And then a big trip out to Manitoba for 3 games and 3 nights this weekend, including 2 against the Winnipeg Ice, who look like almost unstoppable.
Well, what was it? They started, the Winnipeg Ice started the year, 10-0 or something like that. And yeah, it's amazing. And that was a question that a lot of Blades fans had. Obviously, the departure of Mitch Love, albeit for a very good reason, because he took a well-deserved opportunity with the Stockton Heat of the American Hockey League, as Wendell Clark says that it is a rough weekend for the Blades, or was a rough weekend for our Blades. And yes, it was. But, you know, a lot of people didn't really know who Brendan Sawney was, but I think he also was the assistant coach in Everett, much like Mitch Love was, right, when he got hired. So maybe it's something the Silvertips are doing. I don't know. But, you know, what have you kind of seen from Brendan Sawney so far in his first year as a coach with this group, getting them to buy in? Yeah, you know, there is a lot of similarities between him and Mitch Love, but there's a lot of differences as well. I mean, they're two different people, obviously. And the thing that really sticks out to me about Brendan Sawney is that he is, and I mean, this is true of a lot of coaches, but he really harps on his players to not get complacent and not get too full of themselves. You know, they have this great start, but more often than not, when you talk to him, even after a win, he's talking about, well, you know, we turned the puck over this many times, or our breakouts weren't great, or this or that. Even to the point that I believe there was a game, I don't know if it was last weekend or the weekend before, he said, I'm honestly not trying to be a downer here. Like, I just, you know, you want to make sure that guys are on top of things. But his biggest thing is about passion. And he uses the word passion a lot. He wants to see that team playing with purpose, with passion, all the way through every game. The old 60-minute cliche. But he really, really puts a lot of emphasis on that, more so than coaches that I've dealt with in the past, on that really playing with that love for the game. And if you play that way, you know, he believes that those good habits will follow, and you'll be able to execute. So, you know, a lot of people had that team pegged as maybe 3rd or 4th in the division coming into the season, maybe top 2 if they really pushed it. But I think they've opened some people's eyes here early in the season. Now it's going to be a question, as their schedule gets a little tougher, if they can keep on going with what they've been able to do for the majority of the first month and a bit. You were on, one of the many hats that you wear is also being on campus as a reporter, not as a student. We'll clarify that. Hey, I'm in the same boat too, but you do spend a lot of time on campus. You were doing the basketball this past weekend. The ladies got their 2020 championship rings. What was it like being back in the pack in that atmosphere to see that ring ceremony and that banner raising this past weekend?
You know, it was really, really neat. Like, it's funny when you think back, like that women's basketball team for the Huskies, they won their second national championship literally the weekend before everything's shut down. The next weekend was the University Cup for hockey, right? And the Huskies men were out there.
Yeah.
They had played their quarterfinal game, and then the tournament got shut down. So it was a matter of days. They might have not even won that championship had things been shut down just a few days earlier. So, I know talking to the women's team, they feel so fortunate that they were able to finish that off because they had such a special group. And to see them kind of come back together after more than a year and a half and finally get a chance to, get those championship rings, to hang a couple new banners inside the pack. It was a really cool ceremony, and he had alumni from a whole bunch of different eras of Huskies women's basketball all there to individually present each member of the championship team with their ring. That was a really nice touch, and I got to look at the rings, and even compared to the 2016 rings, these are so much blingier, if I can use that word.
If that is a word.
There are a lot of sparkly things on those rings. They look real nice.
Obviously, football, the Huskies finished first in the Canada West for football, so they're hosting the Hardy Cup semifinals next week. They got a big win over Calgary this past weekend. That's going to be interesting to see if they can go on a playoff run. And then, obviously, the big story on campus is men's hockey, right? Mike Babcock. I'm not sure if you've had a chance to cover that at all, but if you have, what have you kind of seen in terms of the buzz around that?
Yeah, it's funny. This Canada West Conference for men's hockey, and I think it's true of a lot of the sports, the youth sports this fall, this season in particular, is it's hard to kind of handicap where teams are at because there's been a lot of turnover in a lot of programs. There are a few exceptions, but in a lot of cases, there are players who may have otherwise had one more year left, but they finished their schooling last year, so they moved on. So there are a lot of new faces on these teams, and that's true of the men's hockey team as well. So I think they're still trying to figure out kind of where they stand, but they've had a nice start this year so far. And, the one thing I've noticed, I've been in a couple of practices this season, is I don't think I've ever seen a head coach more directly involved with every element of the practice during practice. And every head coach is obviously, it's their plan that they're executing, but you might see a little bit more deferral to assistant coaches to run this drill or that drill or whatever the case may be. And I go to practice there. Mike Babcock is skating almost as much as the players are. He is gesticulating. He is communicating. It's all business all the time. And, that forces the players to really be minding, their P's and Q's and on task. But I think he's also kind of learning how different youth sports hockey is now than when he coached the University of Lethbridge back in the early 90s. It's much more about the student athlete now, right? And so he's acknowledged that. But these players, when they're at the rink, they're in full hockey mode, and they seem to be buying whatever he's selling.
You are on a time crunch, so we will get you out of here super quick. Some of your career highlights, what kind of sticks out to you in terms of some of the events that you've got to cover, and maybe some of the people that you've got to meet along this journey?
You know what? It sounds cliche, but it's almost all a highlight reel. I'm not someone that necessarily grew up dreaming of working in sports media like some people do. But to get a chance to, hear people's stories and find out what makes them tick and how they got to where they are, that's really fun. But in terms of some of the events and things, I mean, being in Saskatoon, covering consecutive PFC and Canadian Bowl championships for the Saskatoon Hilltops, that's so much fun. Watching, even though it wasn't here in Saskatoon, watching the Huskies, lift the Hardy Cup and a 10-year drought a couple of years back, that was pretty great. But seeing the Rush come to town, I took this job at Global that fall, basically, when they were gearing up for their first season in Saskatoon. So I've got to cover them from basically day one here in Saskatchewan, and watching them come together and then being in the building for that first championship and on the floor with those players while they were celebrating. That's pretty hard to top something like that.
Yeah. We do have one more question before we let you go, and this one comes courtesy of everybody's best friend, Ray Morrison. He wants to know who your favorite sportscaster growing up was in Saskatoon, and then he is also quick to point out that there's only one right answer. So answer carefully.
Yeah. Hey, How could I not go with Ray? Come on. I was just listening to the two of you on the football game just this past weekend. It was a treat, an absolute treat. Yeah, no, fantastic. Shout out to Ray. Great person. I'm not just saying that because you're related and he's asking the question, but but it is a really cool market to work in sports because Saskatchewan, unlike a lot of other markets, you see the cuts that are happening in media everywhere. But the thing that separates us from a lot of those other markets is that a lot of the teams that are important to fans here don't get national coverage. You take out the Riders and that's pretty much it. So it still matters. The local sports still matter, whether it's on TV or in the newspaper or on the radio. You don't necessarily see that in some of these other markets across the country. So it's a real privilege to be able to still do that when you see colleagues that have lost their jobs in other parts of the country, but also because of the collegiality of the other media members like Ray and other guys like that. Like it doesn't feel competitive. We're not trying to elbow each other aside for scoops and that sort of thing. We know we're all kind of in this together, and it's a great bunch of people to be a part of. So I feel very lucky to be just one piece of that puzzle.
Well, that was like 2 weeks ago, right? At Griffiths for when the Huskies were taking on the Rams. We were all in the media row or whatever you want to call it at Griffiths, and we were all just talking and having a grand old time. And that's just how it is in Saskatoon. Monty wants to know what time the Husky football game is on Saturday. I believe it's a 2:00 game on Saturday against the UBC.
1 o'clock. I think it's 1 o'clock because it's a doubleheader of semifinals. I think the second one goes at 4. Don't quote me on that.
We'll have to confirm that.
I believe it's 1 o'clock, which would be nice for our weekend guy. A little extra time before deadline.
I guess I guess to answer your question, Monty, is don't listen to us because we really don't know. So
split decision.
But Ryan, thanks so much for joining us and much appreciated. So like I said, thanks so much. This has been another episode of the YXE Sports Podcast, and a big thanks to you for tuning in, and we will do the same thing next week. So until then, stay safe.